The command hall was unnervingly silent. High-ranking JSOC officers, men and women whose careers had spanned decades and whose medals glimmer under the harsh fluorescent lights, froze mid-step. Their eyes darted back and forth, searching for a logical explanation that simply did not exist. At the center of the room, Colonel Robert Travis, 50 years old, rigid and statuesque, stood with the weight of his decorated career pressing on his shoulders. He was known across multiple theaters for his precision, his iron discipline, his ability to command troops in the most chaotic situations. Yet, now, even he seemed momentarily unmoored, as if the floor beneath him had shifted in ways he couldn't anticipate. Travis dropped the clipboard he had been holding. The metallic clang echoed like a gunshot across the hall, bouncing off the concrete walls and reverberating in the ears of everyone present. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the murmurs began, rising like a tide. But before words could form, Travis's voice, usually so firm and cutting, trembled in disbelief. "Repeat that. What did you just say your call sign is?" he asked, each syllable heavy with incredulity. Laura Mendez, her low-rank uniform meticulously neat, her brown hair tied back in a functional ponytail, lifted her gaze. Her eyes were calm, almost serene, yet there was an unmistakable sharpness to them, a controlled authority that did not belong to someone wearing the insignia of a petty officer second class. There was no trace of fear, no tremor in her posture, only an unyielding composure that seemed to challenge the very air in the room. Finally, after a beat that stretched longer than anyone would have expected, she spoke. "Blaze." The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps rippled across the room, some stifled, some impossible to hide. It was a name that, until this moment, had been whispered only in the most classified corridors of special access programs, a call sign spoken with reverence, awe, and a heavy undercurrent of caution. Tier 1 covert operators, like Blaze, didn't exist on base manifests. They weren't accounted for in standard military systems. They were ghosts, shadows that moved across the world under orders so secret that even seasoned officers in JSOC could only speculate on their existence. Travis's face drained of color as comprehension dawned on him. 15 days. 15 days he had spent belittling this woman, humiliating her in front of enlisted and officers alike, assuming she was nothing more than a low-ranking tech augment. He remembered the countless minor irritations he had inflicted, the sharp reprimands and veiled threats, each designed to remind her of her place in the hierarchy. Yet now, in a single word, that fragile illusion had been obliterated. He understood the terrible truth. The woman he had spent over 2 weeks condescending to, questioning, undermining, had been operating under direct presidential authority, invisible in plain sight. His mind raced through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. The officers around him were frozen as well, some pale, some gripping their chairs in disbelief. Sergeant David Cole, standing at the edge of the room, remained still but alert, eyes narrowing as he noted the shift in Travis. Even Cole, who had witnessed countless covert operators and high-level briefings, felt the sudden weight of tension that seemed to radiate from Laura, as if her presence alone could rewrite the rules of the room. The camera, or rather the narrator's omniscient gaze, would later describe this moment as one that would forever alter Travis's perception of control and authority. A decorated officer of half a century, whose career had been built on the foundations of rigid command and unassailable reputation, had just realized that he had been humiliated not through failure or incompetence, but by a quiet, invisible force he could neither challenge nor understand. Laura's calm, unwavering declaration of her true call sign, Blaze, was not merely a revelation of identity. It was an unspoken lesson in restraint, discipline, and the terrifying efficiency of those who operate in shadows with the full weight of presidential authority behind them. The hall seemed to shrink around Travis. He staggered slightly, feeling the weight of judgment and realization pressing on him. Every snicker he had suppressed, every scoff he had delivered to the quiet tech in the corner, now came back to him with the intensity of a lightning strike. He realized, with visceral clarity, that the woman he had underestimated was far beyond his comprehension or control. And then the screen cut to black, leaving nothing but the echo of a single thought. He had been bested, outmaneuvered, and exposed by a force he had no authority to challenge. But to understand why this moment shattered him, we need to go back 15 days. 15 days earlier, the concrete walls of the JSOC Auxiliary Cyber Intelligence Cell hummed with a constant, low-frequency vibration, the almost imperceptible pulse of encrypted servers working around the clock. The room smelled faintly of ozone and warm electronics, a scent that had become familiar to the operators who spent long shifts inside. Fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, reflecting off polished metal racks and casting brief shadows across the floor, shadows that seemed to move with the subtle rhythm of the machines. Within this environment, Laura Mendez moved with deliberate precision, almost blending into the hum of the technology surrounding her. Her naval uniform was crisp, insignia properly affixed, hair tied back in a practical ponytail, and her expression carefully neutral. To anyone observing, she appeared to be just another petty officer second class, intelligence specialist second class, temporarily assigned from a fleet intelligence unit to assist with base operations. The cover was flawless, every gesture, every keystroke, every glance projected a sense of quiet competence without drawing attention. Yet beneath that disciplined exterior, she carried the weight of a far more dangerous identity. To 3 people in Washington, she was no mere petty officer. She was BLAZ, a Tier 1 operative of the CIA's Special Activities Division, a clandestine penetration and counter-infiltration officer embedded within JSOC under a direct directive from the Director of National Intelligence. Her presence here was invisible, sanctioned at the highest level, and shielded from all but a handful of eyes. Colonel Robert Travis entered the room with his usual presence, the sound of his polished boots clicking against the metal floor like a metronome counting down to judgment. His ego filled the space as surely as his body did, radiating authority that he wielded with practiced precision. "Mendez," he barked without preamble, his voice slicing through the soft hum of the servers, "your last data pull took too long. Coffee? Black? And don't touch my console again." His gaze was sharp, a mixture of irritation and condescension. Laura's response was a measured nod, no argument, no hesitation. No sign that his words had even registered beyond the superficial acknowledgement required by protocol. She returned to her station, her fingers resuming their work on a complex encrypted interface. To the casual observer, it looked like routine data entry, but Sergeant David Cole, a senior enlisted officer in JSOC with decades of experience and an acute eye for detail, leaned back slightly in his chair, narrowing his eyes. He had seen countless operators pass through this room, and none had ever moved with such speed and precision across a live, multi-layered encrypted interface. "Is 2S don't do that," he murmured under his breath, a mixture of eye and suspicion threading his tone. Travis, impatient and unobservant of Cole's quiet remark, strode over to Laura's station, snatching a folder from her hand. The slap of paper against his palm was sharp, discordant. "Stop pretending you're more important than you are," he barked, a statement meant to reinforce the hierarchy, to remind her of her supposed station within the chain of command. His eyes narrowed, confident in his dominance, yet unaware that every word, every movement, was being measured and catalogued by someone whose operational experience far exceeded his own. Laura's jaw flexed almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of defiance that lasted less than a heartbeat. Cole noticed it immediately, his trained eyes catching the flicker of controlled emotion that would have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant. That subtle twitch, a fleeting, disciplined rebellion, was a hook, a clue to something far greater than her lowly cover rank suggested. The air in the room seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly, as if the servers themselves had sensed the undercurrent of tension and silent power. To the outside world, this was just another day, a high-security cyber intelligence cell, a colonel exerting authority, a petty officer performing assigned tasks, a senior enlisted quietly monitoring operations. But beneath the surface, layers of secrecy and power moved unseen. Laura's presence here was not just about completing assignments. It was about observation, assessment, and readiness. Every glance she cast, every command she obeyed superficially, was part of a larger strategy, one that would only reveal itself when the timing was absolutely right. Cole, sitting back in his chair, allowed a subtle smile to cross his face, almost imperceptible to anyone not trained to read the smallest of signals. This was no ordinary petty officer. He had a sense, a faint but undeniable recognition, that something extraordinary was operating quietly behind that calm exterior. And even as Travis turned, satisfied with his small assertion of authority, Cole's mind lingered on the faint but telling signs, the speed, the precision, The shadow of defiance. Something about Laura Mendez didn't fit. Something about this operation was far more complex than the base command realized. Colonel Travis stood at the center of the cyber intelligence cell, a smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. He had devised what he believed would be a straightforward test for Laura Mendez, a system calibration task so routine that even the most junior S2S could complete it without breaking a sweat. On the surface, it appeared innocuous, a simple alignment of data nodes and security parameters. But behind the scenes, Travis had tampered with the configuration package, introducing subtle corruption that would cause any standard operator to stumble, to waste precious minutes chasing errors that didn't exist in a properly built system. His intention was clear: force a failure, assert dominance, and remind the room, and Laura, of the hierarchy. Laura took the folder he handed her, her eyes scanning the parameters with a practiced calm. Her fingers moved over the keyboard, tapping commands, analyzing the data structure in a rhythm that seemed almost serene. But her mind was racing, reviewing the architecture, checking dependencies, cross-referencing subsystems, and immediately detecting the anomalies that Travis had inserted. It was subtle, the kind of corruption that might pass unnoticed by even an experienced Navy intelligence specialist, but Laura's training was unlike anything the base had ever seen. Years in the CIA's Cognitive Enhancement Program had honed her memory, analytical speed, and problem-solving to levels few could comprehend. Almost instantaneously, she began to rebuild the missing structure from memory, reconstructing layers of code and architecture with flawless precision. It was a mental exercise she had rehearsed countless times under far more dangerous conditions, exercises that had trained her to see through sabotage, deception, and even active cyber countermeasures. The corrupted nodes, the missing links, the inconsistent sequencing, all of it was absorbed and remade by her hands before Travis could even fully process that a failure was imminent. As she worked, Sergeant David Cole watched silently from the periphery, his eyes narrowing at the speed and accuracy of her fingers. He had observed many operators in his years, including those who claimed advanced proficiency, but he had never seen anything like this. Her movements were deliberate, yet impossibly fast, each keystroke part of a larger choreography, precise and efficient. He felt the familiar chill of recognition again. Something about this operator defied the standard rules, defied the logic of even the most elite Navy. S2S, Travis, walking past the station to inspect her progress, froze mid-step. He blinked rapidly as his eyes scanned the completed configuration on the monitor. The corrupted sections he had intentionally introduced were not just corrected. The entire structure had been seamlessly rebuilt, optimized beyond the expected parameters. Every link, every node, every layer reflected a depth of understanding and technical mastery that he could not rationally explain. For the first time in years, a flicker of unease crossed his usually impenetrable expression. Laura remained silent, her posture calm, betraying none of the cognitive exertion her mind had just completed. She had anticipated sabotage, and she had countered it effortlessly. Travis's attempt at authority had been neutralized by skills he could barely recognize, skills he certainly could not match. And yet, the test wasn't over in his mind. He had to maintain the appearance of control, even as his certainty of dominance crumbled. Meanwhile, Cole's attention shifted downward, noticing a faint glimmer emanating from inside Laura's boot. He leaned closer, his eyebrows raising in disbelief. There it was, a secure micro-device, integrated with technology that was entirely outside the Navy's standard issue. His voice, low and incredulous, whispered to no one in particular, "That's not Navy issue." The device pulsed softly, a quiet reminder of the layers of authority and capability embedded within Laura. It was both a signal and a shield, a conduit through which Tier 1 operations could be coordinated without the base even realizing. The room remained tense, though outwardly nothing had changed. Travis's ego had suffered a subtle blow, one he could neither articulate nor confront openly. Cole's mind raced, cataloging every detail, the speed, the precision, the unseen device. He understood that Laura Mendez was operating on a completely different plane, one that the entire JSOC hierarchy was unaware of, and that recognition carried both awe and a shadow of fear. Laura finally leaned back slightly, closing her eyes for a brief moment, as if confirming internally that the task had been completed to her own, impossibly exacting standard. Nothing in her expression hinted at triumph. There was only calm, control, and a readiness to move on to whatever challenge might come next. But in the minds of those who had witnessed her performance, the seed of doubt had been planted. Travis, for all his authority, could feel it taking root. Cole had already recognized it, and somewhere deep in the room, the silent hum of encrypted servers seemed almost to acknowledge it as well. Colonel Travis leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain a posture of authority despite the uneasy tension that had begun to settle in the cyberintelligence cell. Laura Mendez had already demonstrated technical mastery beyond the reach of any IST he had ever encountered, and though he tried to mask it, a seed of doubt had taken root in his mind. Determined to reassert his dominance, he devised what he believed would be an insurmountable challenge. He called out across the hum of servers, his tone sharp, commanding, "Mendez, I'm assigning you a threat response model. A hypothetical insurgent cell has been detected in our area of interest. You have 30 minutes to build a full operational plan. Use your station. Make it detailed, make it accurate." To a typical analyst, this task would require a team of 6, each pulling data from multiple sources, cross-referencing intelligence, and painstakingly constructing a layered operational plan. Travis assumed Laura would struggle, that she would falter under the pressure, revealing her true rank and, more importantly, her lack of capability. He didn't realize that Laura's mind worked differently, not just methodically, but with the strategic foresight and layered cognition trained for operations classified well above JSOC's clearance. Laura's fingers hovered briefly over the keyboard. Then, she closed her eyes, leaning back slightly, a motion of calm concentration. She began to visualize the operational environment in her mind, mapping nodes, threats, and contingencies with an internal precision that was almost preternatural. She constructed a multi-layered escalation ladder, anticipating how the insurgent cell might react at each stage of engagement, from initial detection to full-scale confrontation. She plotted quick reaction force routes, ensuring every team had viable entry and exit vectors, accounting for urban terrain, civilian presence, and potential enemy countermeasures. She integrated ISR tasking seamlessly, designing surveillance coverage that left no blind spots. Every exfiltration contingency was prepared with redundant options, incorporating both overt and clandestine extraction methods. The sequencing was flawless, indistinguishable from the planning models employed only by CIASAT, SOG Tier 1 teams during real-world extraction missions. Sergeant David Cole leaned forward in his chair, watching with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. He had seen his share of high-tier operators, but nothing prepared him for the speed, precision, and layered sophistication of Laura's planning. He whispered under his breath, almost unable to believe what he was seeing. "That's black-tier planning. How the hell does she know that?" His eyes followed her hands as they moved effortlessly across the interface, linking data points, inserting contingencies, and verifying assumptions with a skill that defied the Navy's training manuals. Travis paced behind her, studying the screen as she worked. Each passing second chipped away at his confidence. He could not rationalize her performance. It was beyond his understanding, and with every keystroke, every layer she added, his own insecurity grew. He felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the prickling of doubt in his gut, the first real challenge to his authority in decades. He had built his career on control, on the unquestionable hierarchy of rank and experience, and now, here was a subordinate, in every outward sense, a lowly petty officer, executing strategies he could not replicate, could not even fully comprehend. As the 30-minute window drew to a close, two junior analysts whispered to each other as Laura walked past, her calm stride betraying nothing of the intellectual storm she had just conducted. "This structure looks like someone trained under Epsilon-level access," one said. The words, though quiet, carried weight. Travis froze mid-step, his stomach sinking. Epsilon-level access was not merely high clearance. It was nearly mythical, a level of strategic and operational expertise reserved for a select few operatives with presidential authorization to operate in clandestine theaters. Laura, oblivious to the ripples her presence created, returned to her console after a brief stretch. Her focus never wavered, never rushed. She had anticipated every potential failure, every subtle disruption, and accounted for them all in her internal model before touching the keys. Travis remained rooted to the spot, watching her, the color draining slightly from his face. The realization that the woman he had underestimated and dismissed was operating at a level far beyond his comprehension pressed down on him with crushing clarity. Cole, observing silently, let a slow nod escape him. He had seen enough to know that Laura Mendez was no ordinary petty officer. She was something entirely different, a Tier 1 asset, invisible in plain sight, functioning within a web of authority and operational capability that the entire base hierarchy could neither see nor challenge. And somewhere deep within Travis, a voice whispered that his assumptions, his arrogance, and his control were all illusions, destined to be shattered by the quiet, methodical force that moved among them. Known only as Blaze, the comms room was alive with low-level chatter, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards, and the occasional hum of servers processing real-time intelligence. Mid-shift, the tension was already palpable. Operators were coordinating a complex JSOC hostage extraction in an urban environment abroad, a mission that required flawless timing, absolute situational awareness, and total reliance on drone surveillance for eyes on the target. Every operator understood that a single misstep could cost lives. Suddenly, the high-pitched alarm pierced the room. Screens flickered violently as the primary drone feed collapsed, lines of data vanished midstream. Operators on the ground, dependent on the feed for tactical oversight, reported loss of visual. Panic rippled through the room like an electric shock. The normally composed officers froze, their training colliding with the sheer unpredictability of a critical system failure. Colonel Travis, standing near the center of the chaos, stiffened in disbelief. His eyes darted from screen to screen, unable to comprehend how such a failure had occurred. Orders were shouted, but the usual protocol yielded nothing. The comms room was briefly a cacophony of confusion and static. Every second stretched painfully, every heartbeat amplified by the knowledge that a misstep could result in the loss of hostages or operators. Laura Mendez, however, remained unnervingly calm. Her hands moved with precise efficiency across the console, ignoring the alarms, ignoring the frantic shouts, ignoring the tension that threatened to crush everyone around her. Her mind instantly mapped the situation, analyzing the network architecture, tracing data paths, and identifying the point of failure. She bypassed the compromise segments with a method that was foreign to Navy procedures and entirely outside JSOC's standard protocols. Her fingers executed the CIA SOG Tactical Network Relink Protocol, a highly classified procedure accessible only to Tier 1 covert operators. In 10 seconds, a flicker of green returned to the drone feed. The camera reacquired its target lock, operators on the ground regained their visual, and the extraction mission proceeded with perfect timing. A potential catastrophe had been averted, a disaster that could have ended in multiple casualties prevented by the silent, decisive intervention was single operative. Sergeant David Cole stared at Laura as if he were seeing a ghost. He had known she was extraordinary, but witnessing the application of covert-level protocols in real time, under such extreme pressure, was unlike anything he had encountered in his years of service. His mind struggled to process the combination of skill, authority, and calm under fire that Laura exhibited. Travis, red with embarrassment, finally regained his voice. His ego, bruised and shattered, surfaced in anger. "You bypassed our command architecture," he snapped, his words sharp but tinged with incredulity. "You're removed from the floor until further notice." His tone carried authority, but it lacked conviction. The command structure he relied upon had just been exposed as insufficient in the face of a Tier 1 operator's intervention. Cole did not hesitate. His voice carried across the room, steady and unwavering. "Sir, she saved an entire assault team," he said. The words a blunt acknowledgement of the reality Travis refused to accept. The room went silent for a moment, the gravity of the statement sinking in. Every operator in the comms room felt the truth. Protocol had almost failed, and it was not rank, training, or hierarchy that had saved the mission, but the quick thinking and hidden capabilities of one extraordinary individual. Laura did not argue. She did not hesitate. She gathered her materials with deliberate calm, leaving the comms floor silently as the tension hung thickly in the air. Travis' glare followed her, a mixture of fury, embarrassment, and disbelief. The realization that he had underestimated her, that his authority had been circumvented by someone technically beneath him in rank but far above in operational capability, burned hotter than any reprimand he could issue. As she left the room, a faint pulse glimmered from inside her secure micro-device. Cole noticed it from the corner of his eye, leaning in closer. The device vibrated briefly, and a coded message appeared on its small display. Compromise detected. Identity review inbound. Laura's expression remained neutral, unreadable. The message was a reminder of the stakes, that despite the successful intervention, her cover and identity were constantly under scrutiny, and that a new layer of operational risk was approaching. The comms room slowly returned to controlled chaos. Operators resumed their duties, shaken but functional, while Travis stood frozen, his chest tight, struggling to reconcile authority with the stark reality that rank alone could not contain the force that had just acted in their midst. Cole, silently impressed, knew only one thing with certainty. Laura Mendez was far beyond any operator he had ever encountered, and the full scope of her abilities had only just begun to reveal itself. The days following the drone crisis unfolded like a slow burn across the JSOC auxiliary cell. The mission had ended without loss of life, thanks entirely to Laura Mendez's decisive intervention, yet the tension that now clung to the room seemed almost tangible. Sergeant David Cole, ever vigilant, found himself observing her with a mixture of professional curiosity and growing suspicion. He noticed details that most would miss: the faint scar patterns along her ribs, partially concealed beneath the crisp folds of her uniform. They were old, precise, angular, and unmistakable to someone trained in Tier 1 combat medicine and operational injury assessment. Knife scars, real combat scars. Not the kind picked up during training exercises or simulated close-quarters drills. Cole's pulse quickened slightly as the implication settled. This woman had survived encounters few could imagine, had been trained in environments even more hostile than anything JSOC faced routinely, and had endured trauma with the kind of stoic control that only a seasoned clandestine operator could maintain. Colonel Travis, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the depth of Laura's background, yet his unease continued to grow. During a brief walk past her station, his eyes caught a sliver of something he could not immediately identify behind her ear. It was small, subtle, and yet profoundly out of place in the Navy's uniform hierarchy. A cipher tattoo, intricate, minimalist, almost imperceptible, marking affiliation with the CIA Directorate of Operations. Its significance was lost on the military eye. To anyone untrained or unaware, it could be dismissed as a minor personal marking. But Travis, conditioned by authority and accustomed to control, experienced an almost subconscious dread. He did not know what it meant, but he knew it was a symbol of something he could not command, could not influence, could not even fully understand. The notion that this petty officer might be more than she appeared at him, pricking at his pride and shaking the foundations of his perceived dominance. Laura herself remained outwardly calm, the very definition of controlled composure. Her attention was divided between base operations, mission tracking, and the subtle management of her cover identity. She was aware that every move, every glance, every interaction was being scrutinized by officers who believed themselves in control. Yet she had a constant, quiet awareness of the unseen layers that defined her true mission. It was this duality, the seamless transition between visible and hidden authority, that allowed her to operate undetected in an environment specifically designed to intercept anomalies like her. Late one night, the quiet hum of servers and the subtle whir of cooling fans in the cyber cell were punctuated by the brief illumination of her secure device. A call came through, encrypted, disguised, and distorted to all observers. The voice that emanated from the speaker was electronically warped, masking human tone, yet the urgency was unmistakable. Blaze, it rasped, maintain cover, JSOC command being briefed. The words were measured but charged with implicit danger. Laura acknowledged them with a slight nod, her expression as calm as ever, but her eyes, ever calculating, flickered with the precise attention of someone processing operational contingencies in real time. In the room, the call registered differently. Travis, working late on reports, heard nothing more than static punctuated by faint, unintelligible syllables. Yet, even that was enough. Something primitive stirred in him. A sense of vulnerability, of incompleteness, of being blindsided. The human mind is sensitive to patterns, and the static's cadence suggested intentional manipulation. Subconsciously, it planted fear, the kind that grows when authority is shown to be illusory, when control is no longer absolute. He could not decode it, could not confront it, and worst of all, he could not predict its next appearance. Cole, observing from a distance, watched Laura as she quietly processed the encrypted instructions. The subtle twitch of her eyes, the fraction of a second pause before she returned to her work, the barely perceptible flex of muscles, every motion reflected a lifetime of training designed to prepare for situations exactly like this. She absorbed the message, recalibrated her mental map, and adjusted for contingencies without altering the outward appearance of routine. To anyone else, she remained a competent IS-2, quietly efficient, entirely unremarkable. To Cole, she was slowly revealing the depth of a Tier 1 operative, someone capable of surviving invisible threats, counteracting hidden manipulations, and managing crises while maintaining an impenetrable facade. Travis, unaware of the specific capabilities of CIA SOB Tier 1 operators, could feel the walls of his authority compressing. Every observation, every anomaly, every fleeting glimpse of Laura's hidden identity chipped away at his confidence. The cipher tattoo, the scars, the non-standard skill set, it was all evidence that he had been playing a game without knowing the rules. And yet, Laura's calm control suggested that she was entirely aware of the risk she imposed on him, and that she wielded it not recklessly, but with precision, measured to maintain her cover until the proper moment arrived. The shadow behind her cover was no longer a mystery to those who paid attention. Cole understood it, Travis feared it without fully realizing why, and Laura wielded it as a quiet, invisible tool, a reminder that beneath the ordinary naval insignia was something extraordinary, a force trained to operate, unseen, unchallenged, and entirely beyond the comprehension of those around her. The announcement came over the base intercom with crisp formality. A major inspection briefing was scheduled, and Joint Command personnel would be flying in for a full review. Awards would be distributed, performance summaries assessed, and operational readiness scrutinized under the watchful eyes of generals and senior staff. For most personnel, it was just another day of scrutiny and minor stress, but for Colonel Travis, it was a stage set for personal vindication. He saw in the ceremony the perfect opportunity for one final assertion of authority, one last public humiliation of Laura Mendez before he filed his formal complaint to have her removed from the floor. His mind ran through every possible angle, every remark, every carefully honed part that could expose her supposed inadequacy in front of the highest-ranking officers in the room. Travis arrived early to the inspection hall, the echo of his polished boots on the metal floor like a drumbeat to his own ego. He meticulously inspected his uniform, ensuring every crease was sharp, every insignia gleaming. He practiced his speech quietly, under his breath, every syllable crafted to assert dominance, command attention, and reinforce his reputation as a capable, uncompromised leader. To him, this was more than ceremony, it was a victory lap, a public reaffirmation of everything he believed about hierarchy, experience, and control. In his mind, the petty officer who had disrupted his authority in the cyber cell would finally be reminded of her place. Meanwhile, Laura Mendez moved through the day with her usual calm. Her outward demeanor remained perfectly composed, as if the inspection and its audience were merely another variable in the predictable landscape of base operations. Her mind, however, remained alert and focused, absorbing the dynamics of the room, noting the positions of observers, and calculating contingencies in case any attempt to undermine her cover surfaced. Every movement was deliberate, every glance measured. She was prepared to maintain the facade of a competent IS-2, yet behind her calm exterior, the shadow of her true identity waited, posed for the precise moment when revelation would be advantageous. Sergeant David Cole, seated quietly at a console near the back, had other priorities. He had taken advantage of the lull in operational activity to access archived Epsilon-level logs, the most classified material he had ever touched. His fingers moved rapidly, eyes scanning lines of code and encrypted records until he stumbled upon a single entry, brief but profoundly significant. BlazeSat, SOG Presidential Directive Authority. He froze, the words sinking into him like ice water. His blood ran cold. He understood immediately that this was no ordinary operative, no low-level augment temporarily assigned to the base. This was a Tier 1 asset operating under direct presidential authority, hidden in plain sight for purposes that transcended even the highest levels of JSOC. Cole's mind raced. The implications were staggering. Not only had Travis consistently underestimated Laura Mendez, but the colonel had done so against someone who carried the full weight of presidential authority, someone whose capabilities and clearance exceeded any within the room. The realization filled him with both awe and unease. He had long suspected there was more to Laura than rank suggested, but seeing it confirmed in black and white, and coded into official logs, was overwhelming. The room around him continued to hum with pre-ceremony activity, oblivious to the seismic truth he now carried in his mind. Travis, polishing his uniform for the umpteenth time, remained blissfully unaware of Cole's discovery. His ego demanded the ritual of preparation, the tangible reinforcement of control. He rehearsed every line of his speech as if it were a script, a lifeline to the authority he feared was slipping from him. Every polished button, every crease in his trousers, was meant to communicate dominance. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a subtle, unacknowledged tension, a sense that something in the room, someone in the room, could not be commanded or contained by rank alone. Laura, moving quietly among the staff, remained the picture of disciplined professionalism. No one suspected that behind her calm exterior lay years of Tier 1 experience, decades of clandestine operations, and authority granted directly by the president. She was a ghost among the living, seen but invisible, operating on a level far above the scrutiny of any officer in the room. Yet Cole now knew, and somewhere deep inside, he realized that when a moment came, the truth would shift the balance of power in a way no ceremony could ever contain. The inspection hall was set, chairs aligned in precise rows, banners of command displayed prominently, and the air charged with anticipation. Travis, convinced of his imminent triumph, could not sense the tectonic undercurrent running through the room, the quiet knowledge that the petty officer he intended to humiliate was, in fact, untouchable, invisible, and immensely more powerful than anyone present realized. The stage was ready. All that remained was for the curtain to rise. The inspection hall was filled with the quiet buzz of anticipation, the air thick with the scent of polished boots and freshly pressed uniforms. Generals, colonels, and senior JSOC staff occupied the front row, their eyes fixed on the podium at the center of the room. Cameras and recording devices were discreetly positioned, capturing every detail for archival and operational review. The polished floor reflected the harsh overhead lighting, emphasizing the formality and precision of the occasion. The hum of the air conditioning and the low murmur of voices created a tension that was almost physical, like a cord being stretched taut. Colonel Robert Travis stepped confidently to the podium, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the floor. He carried himself with the rigid pride of a career officer who had spent decades mastering authority, command presence, and the meticulous control of perception. His eyes swept the room with calculated precision, lingering just long enough on the assembled officers to convey dominance without arrogance, or so he believed. He raised his hand, letting the brief silence settle, before addressing the room with the practiced tone of one delivering both accountability and spectacle. Petty Officer Mendez, approach. Please explain to Joint Command why you violated protocol last week. A ripple of murmur spread through the assembled staff, low and uncertain. The audience shifted in their seats, to tension palpable. Laura Mendez rose from her chair quietly, moving with a deliberate calm that contrasted starkly with Travis' theatrical stance. Her uniform was immaculate, hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail, eyes controlled, movements precise. She walked slowly, methodically, towards the podium, her gaze steady on the floor ahead of her, revealing nothing, betraying nothing, yet every motion carried a quiet authority that unsettled the room. She was the picture of composure, yet each step carried the weight of decades of clandestine training, of operations executed under conditions most could never comprehend. Travis' confidence faltered slightly as he noticed the calm precision with which she approached. His rehearsed words, crafted for maximum effect, felt suddenly inadequate, like an actor realizing his lines were obsolete. Before Laura could speak, a hand rose from the front row, a two-star general, a presence that commanded immediate attention. The general's voice cut through the murmurs with quiet authority. Colonel Travis, before we address Petty Officer Mendez, we received an encrypted update this morning from Langley. The words struck Travis like a cold wind. His eyes blinked rapidly as he processed them. Langley, he said aloud, incredulous. What the hell does Langley want with a PO2? The question, half rhetorical, half desperate, betrayed a crack in the veneer of control he had worked so hard to maintain. He knew Langley referred to the CIA headquarters, the seat of clandestine authority, the place where decisions far above JSOC's clearance were made. And yet, here it was, linked to a petty officer, an apparent subordinate, someone he believed he had the power to manage, discipline, and belittle. The general produced a sealed black folder, opening it with deliberate slowness. The room leaned forward collectively, a subtle shift of bodies, a tightening of attention as the contents became visible. Inside was a directive that none in the room could ignore, the unmistakable CIA insignia, and beneath it, a stamped notation of extraordinary authority, presidential authorization, SAP Epsilon. The weight of the words pressed down on the room, an invisible hand reminding every officer that some layers of command and capability existed entirely beyond their comprehension or control. The murmurs died abruptly, replaced by a stunned silence. Eyes darted between the folder, Laura, and Travis. The meaning was clear to those who could read the significance. Petty Officer Mendez, the woman Travis had sought to humiliate, the subordinate he had assumed he could control, was authorized at a level far above even the most senior officers in the hall. Presidential authority, SAP Epsilon. These were terms associated with Tier 1 covert operations, missions executed in complete secrecy, often with risk and consequence far beyond the purview of conventional military oversight. Travis felt a cold weight settle in his chest, a mixture of disbelief, shame, and dawning fear. He had rehearsed a confrontation meant to elevate him, to display his command, to reassert his dominance. Instead, the stage had shifted beneath his feet, and he was now the one exposed, the one vulnerable, the one caught unprepared for the true magnitude of the operative standing before him. Laura's calm remained unshaken. Her presence, her composure, her very identity now radiated authority in a way that made the room itself pause. Every officer, from the junior analysts to the two-star general, recognized in her stance, in the black folder, in the insignia, that the chain of command had just been appended in the most dramatic and irrevocable way. The silence stretched, oppressive and electric, as Travis' mind raced to recalibrate his understanding of the situation. Laura, standing at the center of the hall, was no longer merely a petty officer, a subordinate, or an IS-2. She was something far greater, a Tier 1 covert asset, authorized by the president, operating at a level the entire command structure could not challenge. The room itself seemed to acknowledge it, holding its collective breath, waiting for the next move in a game whose rules they had only just begun to comprehend. The general's hand lowered with quiet authority, a subtle but unmistakable nod signaling permission for Laura to break cover. The room, filled with the elite of JSOC Joint Command, collectively held its breath, aware that a revelation of extraordinary magnitude was about to unfold. Laura Mendez stepped forward, her movement measured, precise, and entirely unhurried. Each step was deliberate, conveying the kind of confidence only honed through years of clandestine training and mission-critical experience. Her eyes, calm and unflinching, scanned the room with the same clarity that had guided her through every operation, every data breach, every tactical decision, every invisible confrontation. Yet there was no malice, no aggression. Only authority. Colonel Travis, still at the podium, felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He had rehearsed his triumph, the public humiliation he believed he would impose, but all that preparation now felt futile. He opened his mouth, perhaps to command, perhaps to assert, but the words faltered as Laura's presence began to dominate the space. Her voice, calm and measured, cut through the tense silence. "Colonel, you've asked me repeatedly who I think I am." A hush fell over the room, silence so absolute that the faint whir of the air conditioning seemed to amplify. Laura reached for the top of her uniform with deliberate precision. The movement was slow enough to draw attention, but controlled to avoid theatrics. The buttons unfastened, revealing the concealed identification beneath, a card and insignia no ordinary officer could possess. The text was precise and unmistakable: CIA Special Activities Division, Special Operations Group, Clandestine Tier 1 Operator. The room reacted instantly. Gasps whispered through the hall like a rising tide. Officers leaned forward, some instinctively shielding their mouths in disbelief. The murmurs grew, fragmented and hurried. "That's ASOG combat operatives. They don't operate on bases unless there's a major infiltration threat." She had Presidential Directive, Epsilon, that's above JSOC authority. The realization spread through the ranks with the velocity of shock, a silent acknowledgement that the woman they had underestimated for days had existed far beyond their chain of command, far above any officer's authority in the room. Travis felt as if the floor had dropped beneath him. His carefully constructed command presence, the rehearsed humiliation, the ego-fueled authority he had wielded with such confidence, evaporated in an instant. The officer who had challenged him, who had bypassed protocols, who had displayed uncanny technical and strategic acumen, was no mere subordinate. She was a force of nature, a covert operative operating under direct presidential mandate, invisible until the precise moment when her presence would redefine every perception in the room. Laura's gaze settled on Travis, steady, controlled, unflinching. She let the weight of her identity settle fully across the hull, allowing every officer to absorb the truth in real time. Then, with a deliberate pause, she delivered the final detail, the one that had haunted Travis with the unspoken tension of his underestimation. "And you asked for my call sign." The room, already suspended in awe and disbelief, grew stiller. Every eye fixed on her as she uttered the single word that encapsulated years of legend, missions of extreme secrecy, and authority beyond comprehension. Its blaze, silence enveloped the room like a physical force. Officers froze mid-motion, their minds struggling to reconcile rank, authority, and the staggering truth of the operative standing before them. Blaze, the name whispered in the most secure corridors, the operative whose feats were known only in classified circles, was now undeniable. Rumors of her exploits flooded the unspoken space, the hostage cell rescued in Sudan, the extraction of a compromised case officer in Prague, the neutralization of a rogue asset inside a NATO facility, the deep cover assessments conducted directly for the president. Each anecdote, previously myth, now felt viscerally real as the room digested the personification of the legend. Travis staggered backward, as if struck by an invisible force. His hands twitched, searching for authority, for control, for a foothold that no longer existed. His mind, trained to command, to dominate, to dictate outcomes, faltered under the weight of reality. Everything he had relied upon, rank, training, experience, perception, collapsed simultaneously. The room, the chain of command, the hierarchy he had trusted, all dissolved into a single, undeniable truth. He had underestimated the quietest, most unassuming presence in the room, and the cost of that miscalculation was absolute. Laura stood tall, unshaken, as the hall absorbed the revelation. Every officer, every senior leader, every seasoned operator recognized the seismic shift she represented. The operative known as Blaze had emerged from the shadows, not as a subordinate to be judged, but as a force whose authority, skill, and mandate far exceeded anyone present. The chain of command had been redefined, and the entire base, from the lowest analyst to the two-star general, understood in that instant that the Quiet One was, in fact, untouchable, unstoppable, and operating at a level they could only begin to comprehend. The morning light filtered through the windows of the JSOC command complex, catching the polished floors and casting long shadows across the hallways that had, just hours before, been charged with tension and disbelief. Colonel Robert Travis' career, once steady and unassailable, now lay in ruins. Official orders had been processed overnight. He was formally relieved of command for multiple failures, including abuse of authority, interference with a presidentially authorized covert operation, and the reckless compromise of a CIA operative during a live mission. The news spread quickly through the base, whispered between officers in corridors and across secure channels, leaving a trail of stunned murmurs in its wake. The atmosphere was markedly different as personnel moved through the base. Half the staff assembled in formation, their expressions a mixture of respect and awe. Among them, Sergeant David Cole stood at attention, eyes fixed not on rank insignias or ceremonial procedure, but on the figure who had irrevocably altered the hierarchy and perception of authority on the base. Laura Mendez emerged from the shadows of the restricted wing, no longer clad in the Navy uniform that had hidden her true identity. Instead, she wore civilian covert attire, a fitted tactical jacket, black gloves, and understated gear that marked her as someone operating entirely outside the visible chain of command. To most, she appeared unremarkable. To those with clearance and awareness, she was unmistakable. Blaze, Tier 1 operative, the force that had reshaped the previous day's events and the base's understanding of power. As she walked down the hall, The assembled personnel instinctively snapped to attention. Salutes were rendered not for her official rank, which was meaningless outside the theater of covert operations, but for the undeniable respect she commanded through action, capability, and authority. Each step she took was deliberate, measured, the cadence of someone accustomed to moving through both visible and invisible layers of command. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the formation, noting each subtle nod, each recognition of what she represented. Cole fell in step beside her as she reached the end of the hall. His expression was a mixture of admiration, relief, and professional deference. "Ma'am, what's your next move?" he asked, his voice quiet but tinged with urgency and respect. Laura paused briefly, adjusting her gloves with a precise flick of the fingers, as if sealing both readiness and intent. Her eyes met his, sharp, unwavering, and calculating, the kind of gaze that could measure threats and opportunities in a heartbeat. "Another infiltration," she said softly, yet each word carried weight, promise, and inevitability. "Another threat, another fire." Without hesitation, she continued forward, her movement fluid and unbroken, a silent command to all who watched that the mission never stopped, the work never paused, and the operative remained fully engaged, fully aware, and fully untouchable. The restricted wing loomed ahead, its door a barrier to all but those with the proper clearance. She approached with authority, keying in the access codes with the same precision that had defined every mission in her career. The door slid open, revealing darkness and purpose beyond its threshold. With a final step, she entered, and the door sealed behind her with a resonant thud, a symbolic and literal closure that marked both her presence and the continuation of a mission that few would ever understand. Those left in the hallway, including Cole and the assembled formation, felt the weight of what had just occurred. Travis' absence was palpable, a stark reminder that arrogance, underestimation, and ignorance of true authority carried consequences that reverberated far beyond the individual. For the officers and analysts present, the event was more than vindication. It was a lesson etched into their memory. Never underestimate the quiet one, the unseen operator, the force that moves silently yet leaves an indelible mark on every operation and every chain of command. As the hallway emptied, the silence hung for a moment, punctuated only by the faint hum of security systems and the distant echo of boots elsewhere in the complex. The name Blaze, once whispered in secrecy, now carried the weight of truth and respect. She was gone from view, yet her presence lingered, a force field of competence, authority, and untouchable skill. The base, its command structure, and even those far removed from the event would remember this day as the day a quiet operative rewrote the rules, leaving an unforgettable lesson in vigilance, humility, and respect for those who operate in shadows. Never underestimate the quiet one. And with that, Blaze was already gone, moving to the next threat, the next infiltration, the next fire waiting to be controlled. If you enjoyed this story and want to follow more incredible tales of courage, stealth, and unexpected triumphs, make sure to subscribe to the channel for new videos and exclusive updates.